Just come and go.
And do some even funeral shop.
Just the kitchen and the basement.
Nice.
I don't know if I believe that.
I did the hardwood myself upstairs. I'll never do that again.
Isn't it funny those projects you like, I'm gonna tackle
good northern district.
I'm working on it.
There'd be a lot less false arrests there.
I might use you as a reference here.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we can bring the meeting to order. Sorry about that. First of all, let me call the meeting to order. Just apologize, as the public knows, sometimes we have a volume of work upstairs that takes longer, so I apologize for the half-hour delay in start. I also, since there have been a number of comments recently about deputations, I want to just read something I've read before about a message regarding deputations and why we wish them and how they're to be done. The board encourages interested members of the community to provide input on issues which are important to them. However, the board wishes to remind everyone that the following rules when making deputations. First, be respectful. Second, don't use offensive words or language. Third, keep your comments focused on the agenda item you're speaking to, and only on that. Fourth, comments about the conduct of individual police officers or members of the Toronto Police Service or staff are not acceptable. And finally, deputations, as you know, are limited to 5 minutes. The board believes that the public consultation and the input is critical to effective oversight and will continue to facilitate such input in accordance with the board policies and the procedural bylaws. So I just want to make sure that is clear and a reminder to everybody. As we did starting at the last meeting, I want to start with the Aboriginal land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit. With that, there is, I think, Carleen, one deputation. So, Brenda, you are the first.
Give me 1 minute, please. Yeah. Ready to begin, Mr.
Thank you, Brenda.
Pringle?
You've got 5 minutes, as you know.
So, as you know, you have recently started to acknowledge that this used to be Indigenous land, and you know how all of this came about. We had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the Truth and Reconciliation has put out the report several years ago, which has 94 calls to action. You've chosen one of those calls, and the call that you've chosen is you're going to acknowledge that this is native land. So, as far as I know, last month was the first time that you made the decision to make this statement. There are 94 calls to action, and the idea of the calls to action was that there was really going to be reconciliation, truth and reconciliation, and that various organizations and various people in our country would acknowledge what they've done to the Native people and would try to make up for it. Not just that they acknowledge it and say, well, this is what we've done wrong, hey, too bad. All right, so now I want to know the following. The police department and Native people that have been wronged and abused by the police, what are you planning to do regarding truth and What are you planning to do regarding truth and reconciliation? I personally, in July of this year, a scant few months ago, asked this board for truth and reconciliation, and I said I got lies and deceit. Other than lip service to the fact that foreigners trampled the rights of Native people and took over their property, what is the police department going to do about their contribution to truth and reconciliation? It's not enough to just say, well, our building is on top of land that used to be owned by Native people. What are you going to do about your commitment to truth and reconciliation? I've asked you this before. I asked in July, and I feel that I was very hard done by. In fact, my whole family was hard done by, and other Native people have been hard done by. I'll give you a few examples. I remember, I'm old, I remember when the police, as a joke, if you want to call it a joke, it wasn't a joke, it was terrible, used to cut Native prisoners' hair. They all had long hair, and somebody grabbed scissors and cut off their hair. Or they'd grab their medicine pouches and they'd rip them. These were serious matters. And it might seem funny now, but no one's ever addressed any of these issues. And in fact, I've never heard any Native people here addressing anything. The old lady that you had here, Mrs. Sanderson, smudging with Monica from the Peacekeepers. I've called the Peacekeepers and got no help from them. So I didn't really think much of the smudge. What is the police department? I'm not expecting an answer on the spot. I want you all to think, because you've done terrible things. You've done terrible things to our family and terrible things to other people. And you've ignored requests from Native children for help, throwing Native children out of the police stations, ignoring them as if they didn't exist. Because after all, they were nobodies. They didn't exist. What are you going to do as the police department to bring forward your commitment, especially you people on the anti-racist committee? What are you all going to do to show the Native community that you're not joking by saying, oh, we wish to acknowledge this was Native land, and First Nations used, and this one was here, and the other one, and now there's some Inuit people. Who cares? This is lip service to one of the calls to action. What are you really going to do to show that you're sincere, you're sorry? I don't mean you personally, Mr. Pringle. I'm talking in general. Talking about the police department, not the separate members of the board. I want everyone to sit down and give it some thought. Are you going to hold a public hearing and say, let's listen to your grievances, then we'll decide what we're going to do about it? Because Justice Sinclair did not put forward 94 calls to action for his good health. He expected the government was going to take the calls to action and people were going to do something about it. So that is my point. This is not good enough to say this used to be Native land. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. You know, this is not an item, thank you, that's...
I'm just standing here because I'm speaking on the next item.
Okay.
So it's not to walk back and forth.
Okay, good point. I'll concede that one. I was wondering what you were doing, but we need to get input for deliberations. This is not something we're deliberating, but I will take the opportunity just to answer the question, or as part of it. We have met. I met with the Francis Saunderson about the engagement of Native peoples in the discussions. As you know, we've set up the Race Advisory Committee, and we wanted significant representation on that from Native peoples as well. So we will continue. It's an ongoing discussion as to how we get the best input possible as to how we do that. One of the things that Francis asked me at that meeting was, would we do the land recognition? So we've started with that. So thank you for your input. We appreciate it. So let me then go on to a declaration of the conflict of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act and ask if any of my colleagues have anything they wish to declare. If not, thank you. And you're right, Brenda, you do have down for a deputation on this. So again, you've got 5 minutes.
I didn't want you to think I was standing.
No, I was confused. I'm old too, so thank you.
Declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. I now have a copy of the act, and I'm going to tell you, Mr. Andy Pringle, Chairman of the Police Services Board, you're responsible for overseeing the declarations pertaining to conflict of interest. It's my position you're deliberately ignoring incidents that have not been declared under conflict of interest. I've tried to bring a few to your attention, and not only are you ignoring me, but in fact the entire board just pretends they didn't hear what I said. hoping that perhaps I'll sit down, drop dead, and they won't have to hear from me about it again. But you're going to hear about it right now because I am advised that you have been ignoring conflict of interest, and you don't have a right to ignore what I'm saying about conflict of interest. We have 3 lawyers who sit at this table. We've got our lawyer that replaced Carl sitting over there. Miss Mulliner next to her, I'm advised, is a lawyer. The mayor is a lawyer, and I know they all know that what I'm saying is true, but none of them said a word. None of them spoke up and said, yeah, she's right. 1, I'm going to speak about 3 people quickly, and then I'm going to leave it to you. You're the chairman of the board to please look into the conflict of interest. Because under conflict of interest, if you have a conflict, you're not supposed to be voting. So, hey, you've got a conflict. What are you doing sitting here voting on the topics that you have a conflict of interest in? You're supposed to behave ethically and fairly and treat everybody equally. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about other people that I'm about to mention. Number 1, the Chief of Police himself. Chief of Police Mark Saunders has refused consistently over the last year to reveal when he worked at 13 Division, although he publicly got up and gave a speech that I attended naming the divisions that he used to work at. But he's refusing to give the dates to the Privacy Commissioner, and he's refused to respond under Freedom of Information. So, 1982 to present, I am sure he was at 13 Division, but he doesn't admit to it, and everyone's telling me it's not on the computer, and I'm going to tell you right here and now, I'm going to say it again. He wrote a report about me that I feel he had no right to be involved in. He's in a conflict of interest, and he always was. He's talking about his colleagues as opposed to the police force. It's one thing to say you're the chief of the police force, and it's another thing to talk about your close colleagues that you worked with. And he won't tell what position he was in, so I don't know if he was responsible. Some of the police named in my reports are only named by description without badge numbers because they wouldn't give them. I want this matter looked into as a conflict of interest. I've tried to report it. I did follow some advice you gave. You said, well, if you don't like it, go to OIPRD. There is going to be a new law of oversight that has not yet passed into legislation. It's being held up by the Conservative government. So that is why you don't have another charge under OIPRD. The next 2 people are Francis Nunziata and Jim Hart. And I've already brought to the attention of the board their involvement in conflict. But yet Jim Hart made a motion about the topic and Francis seconded it. But you can't do that if you're in a conflict of interest. So question to you, how did people vote on something that they had no right to vote on?
So, Brenda, let me, I'm going to stop you here because...
I'm finished speaking. Thank you.
You've gone beyond, if you've got a specific complaint, you need to do that. You started out by talking about the conflict of interest, but then
conflict of interest means you don't vote.
You moved into specific complaints. So in future, when you've
vote.
got that, would you please make the complaint through the appropriate channels? So thank you very much.
Well, you haven't answered. How do people vote if they're in a conflict of interest?
Brenda, again,
they're not allowed to vote. And you need to oversee that.
Thank you for your input.
So you are illegally allowing people to vote that are in a conflict of interest. I want to bring that to the public's attention. You're allowing votes from people in a conflict of interest, and the only reason there is no charges yet against them because the new law that would allow them to be charged has not passed yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda, for your input.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I just, confirmation, so item number 4 is confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on August the 23rd. May I have a motion to receive?
Not a motion. I just want to point out that I would have loved to have been here in person at the August meeting, but I was actually absent and I marked present. I did watch the proceedings on the channel.
We'll amend that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to receive then, Mr. Jeffers. Councillor Hart, all in favor? Contrary? Thank you. I should just comment that unfortunately Chief Saunders is under the weather. Obviously, as everybody knows, he's got to be more careful than other people when he comes down with a bug. So we are graced by the presence of Deputy McLean, who is filling in today. So thank you, Deputy. So let's go through the agenda. First, we have item number 5, which we hold for a presentation and deputations. I note that item number 6, there's more work that needs to be done, so that has been withdrawn, and we'll come back at a future meeting, at the next meeting, Ryan? At a future meeting, okay. Item number 7, the Chief's Administrative review the vehicle injuries to Mr. Warren Granada. A motion to receive. Colleagues, motion to receive. Mr. Jeffers, seconded. Councillor Hart. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 8, the Chief's Administrative investigation of custody injury to Mr. Giorgio Pella. A motion to receive. Councillor Hart, Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? Item number 9, Chief's Administrative Investigative Review into the custody injury to Mr. Paul Doucette. Motion to receive. Oh, sorry, there's a deputation on that, so we'll hold it. Item number 10 is the semi-annual report write-offs, uncollectible accounts receivable balances January to June 2018. A motion to receive. Ms. Shanna Casera, seconded. Councillor Hart, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 11 is the interim report. So there's deputations on that. We will hold that. Item number 12, there's also deputations on that. So that brings us back to item number 5, which is the enhancement to the Neighbourhood Officer Program. Staff Superintendent Tommaso, are you going to?
Point of order. Mike still able to speak on item number 6? That's all I'm asking.
No, not at this time because it's been withdrawn.
Hi.
Deputy Chief Ewan, you're not listed as.
Good afternoon, Chair and
perhaps you'd
members
be
of the
kind
board.
enough to introduce your team and the subject, and then.
Today we're going to speak to a motion put forward by Mayor Tory dated July 19th in the possibility of the expansion of the Neighbourhood Officers Program for 2019. A little context prior to Staff Tommaso and our colleague from Humber College to give the board a 50-minute overview of what this expansion curtails. The Toronto Police Service has a Neighbourhood Officer Program since 2013. It's been 5 years. Currently, we're covering 33 neighborhoods across the city, and it is our intention on October 1st this year, that's next week, to have an enhanced pilot in 8 of the neighborhoods with some enhancement, because we have looked at our successes and our inputs from community members, most importantly, and from our officers. There are some enhancement needed to ensure this program succeeds, and it's a long-term investment for the wellness of the city, of all the neighborhoods. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask Staff Tommaso and Dr. Thompson from Humber College to give the board an overview and our projection and our ask of expanding the Neighborhood Officer Program for 2019. And we'll have if any questions, we can field them after.
Great.
I just want to point out one more thing. Along this journey, we've been working along with Mr. Jim Rankin, who is the change management specialist from the board, and we've been consulted extensively with our officers, communities, and all the end users, all the stakeholders. So it was a very good collaboration with the change manager from the board.
So this is not just something that is a program that has been existing since 2013. It's one of the keys of the Transformational Task Force recommendations.
Certainly, and then
Yeah.
if you look at the essence of Neighborhood Officers, it speaks to the 3 priorities of the Transformational Task Force, the 3 goals being where the public needs us the most, addressing complex needs, and building community partnership to ensure safer communities. Please.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Mario.
So as Deputy Ewan indicated, I'm here today to provide you with an update on the neighborhood policing at the service, specifically the Enhanced Neighborhood Officer Pilot that we'll be rolling out on October 1st. So what is neighborhood policing? Neighborhood policing is at the center of a modern police service. It includes a familiar, trusted police service focused on community safety and reducing victimization, through collaboration, partnerships, engagement, empathy, and of course, customized customer service delivery. It features neighborhood officers who are empowered, supported, and accountable, as well as trained, evaluated, and rewarded based on skills and competencies that reflect community policing objectives. It is a community-centric service delivery model with a clear correlation between reported crime and disorder issues and the police response. During the next 15 minutes, Dr. Thompson from Humber College and I will provide you with an understanding of how neighborhood policing is the centerpiece of the new service delivery model, how it is aligned to the way forward, how it is enhanced and more integrated program that we have invested in, and how this program will continue to build safe communities and neighborhoods with officers that are focused on local problem solving. I will begin by explaining our current Neighborhood Officer Program, which includes what we have come to learn about our present state, and then provide you with an update about the enhancements we will be making and later evaluating. So today, we have a Neighborhood Officer Program with 96 officers deployed in 33 Toronto Police Service defined neighborhoods across all 17 divisions. This program was started in 2013, and it was meant to reduce crime, to build relationships and trust with our residents, and help us gain insights into the needs of our communities. The operation of this program is division specific, and what that means is that each division uses its own processes and reasoning to select their own respective neighborhoods, their own respective mandates and supporting processes. Currently, we are learning that our neighborhood officers are very well received in their assigned neighborhoods, but are not always available. They're not always dedicated to neighborhood policing duties due to other priorities within our division. So they get called away due to other pressing policing duties, and that's a concern and that's a problem. To understand how to improve our neighborhood policing program, we held a number of consultations, widespread consultations. We consulted formally and informally using various methods to gather feedback from the current neighborhood officer program. And this, of course, included consultations with the community, with members of the Toronto Police Service, with specific neighborhood officers, and learnings from both the way forward and academics. It was important for us to spend time in our communities, asking and listening to the community members so that we may better understand what they want in their neighborhood officers. We held 6 community town hall meetings led by Deputy Peter Ewan and local officers. In addition to face-to-face interaction, we also live-streamed these meetings, which resulted in almost 10,000 views on Facebook. We also took input from our CPLCs and our CCCs, and forum research also helped us out when we conducted all sorts of research back in February and March of 2018. We also asked our members what they thought. Neighborhood officers and supervisors and the rest of the service were engaged through focus groups, surveys, and face-to-face consultations. To provide us with an impartial view, Humber College was engaged to provide an independent academic evaluation from May 2013 to 2016. Selected neighborhoods were examined in a 3-year research study to evaluate the effectiveness of the Neighborhood Officer Program. And at this time, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Doug Thompson from Humber College, who will share key findings from this research. Dr. Thompson has extensive academic experience in sociological and criminological research. He is a published author and a lecturer with over 25 years of experience.
Thank you. So we were asked by the police to do an evaluation of their study, and this was a 3-year study, and we're going to now reduce it down to just a few slides. So the study itself was a targeted survey of people in the areas where the neighborhood officers operated. A total of 4,500 surveys were collected over 3 points in time, as well as focus groups of the community, focus groups of the neighborhood officers, and a Toronto Police Service-wide survey. The demographics that we found, and this is just for the public, that has just the results I'm going to show today. The interesting thing here, this is The majority were female who answered the surveys. These are adults. Just under half designated themselves as a racialized group. And the really interesting thing is that just under half had lived in the neighborhood for 9 years or more, which is really important because they have the knowledge of the changing in the police force as the NOs were brought in and moved. The results themselves were, when we actually punched in the numbers and crunched them, we got a couple of students to redo the numbers because I personally looked at them and thought this isn't quite right, but they were quite astounding. The survey itself was about 45 to 50 questions, and we could group them into three main categories. Are the NOs effective in reducing crime in your neighborhood? Are they creating a good relationship with you as a member of this neighborhood? And are they treating you in a professional manner? The survey results you see in front of you are the percentage of those who agreed or strongly agreed with the statements. So the numbers went up from 77 to 81% of citizens believing the neighborhood officers specifically are effective in reducing crime in the neighborhoods. The rates went from 77 to 89% of building strong relationships inside the communities, and went from 73% to 82% that the police officers were treating them professionally and they were acting professionally. The one great thing about the survey is that we were able to get a lot of demographic data from our survey people, and one of the key things in these neighborhood areas is that we have a lot of racialized citizens, and we ran an analysis of the difference between those who saw themselves as a racialized group and non-racialized group, and there's about a 5% difference in those who agree and strongly agree, with those who self-identify as racialized having a lower level of support of the police, but still this was at 78%, 87% and 80% agreeing or strongly agreeing that the neighborhood officers are effective in their communities. And again, this is an incredibly powerful result that we came up with. In the end, once we'd finished the 3-year evaluation and analyzed the results, we came up with some key recommendations for the Toronto Police Service. And this was built on our survey results as well as our focus groups and surveys from the police force. First one is a consistent and available program mandate, and this is for the police officers themselves, telling them exactly what their role is and what their duties are. Secondly, work performance evaluation. The role of the neighborhood officer is different to the crew and other units. This is soft policing. You can't judge their effectiveness on just arrest rates. We have to come up with a different way of evaluating them. And from our results, they are effective. One of the key things that we got from a lot of the community was they wanted the NOs in their communities for longer. And the NOs themselves wanted to be in the community for longer. Up to that time, they were there for 2 years, and they told us it takes us a year just to get into the community to be accepted. And so they wanted a longer time in the community, and the community themselves said, we want the NOs in here. When we eventually get to know the NOs, suddenly they're taken out. So we need a better transition between one group of NOs and the next group of NOs. And finally, and this came from the public and the police, a better marketing and communication strategy to identify who are the NOs. Because one of the things we came across, and this came across in the focus groups, as shown in the next slide, is that the public saw the NOs not as cops. And this came from the youth as well, that this is not, he doesn't act like a cop, he acts like a normal human being. They saw beyond the badge. And in order to separate them out, I think this will go a great way to enhancing this program. And this is a very effective program. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, based on the research and the evaluation that was done, I'd like to give you an overview of the Enhanced Neighbourhood Officer Program. It includes a number of changes which we have identified and prioritized through our consultations that we will be implementing and later evaluating in 8 City of Toronto, not TPS, but City of Toronto aligned neighborhoods starting October 1st. This enhanced pilot will run for 6 months, and then we will review and evaluate any outcomes of the pilot, including its impact on safety and our communities and neighborhoods. The enhancements to our neighborhood officer pilot are aligned with the feedback provided to us by our community, by our members, by the way forward, and of course by our academic evaluation. In this new service delivery model, neighborhood officers are the centerpiece. To us, this means having experienced officers dedicated to neighborhoods for a 4-year period with flexibility to be in the community when and where they are needed the most. It also means implementing a consistent and available mandate to our neighborhood officers across neighborhoods. To do this, we will rely on a newly developed and standardized mandate, a new role profile, a new performance evaluation under the supervision of experienced sergeants, all geared to delivering enhanced local services to residents of our city's neighborhoods. During our community consultations, we were asked to increase access and visibility to our neighborhood officers to make our officers more identifiable. Neighborhood officers will have marked vest flaps, ball caps, and newly marked police cars. And these are just some of the rocker panels that they will be, that our neighborhood officers will be wearing front and back. And these are the new caps. They will be easily identifiable, not as crew officers, but as neighborhood officers. To help increase accessibility, our officers will have connected officer technology, and their contact information will be published and easily accessible to the community in which they serve. Connected neighborhood officers means these officers will not be tied to a police car or radio. They will be in the community, engaging with the community. They will be available on their connected device 24/7 and will be able to monitor and prioritize the needs of their neighborhoods and communities while they are mobile. Neighborhood officers will maintain a local social media presence, keeping the community informed while making themselves easily available in a variety of ways. Neighborhood officers will also be required to hold monthly neighborhood officer-led community meetings in their communities to discuss neighborhood issues and empower the communities to solve problems. We also understand that building safe communities and neighborhoods does not just include the police. It's more than just the police. It involves all of our partners, which include firstly our community members and also the City of Toronto, residents associations, BIAs, NGOs, and our friends at TCHC. As an example, TCHC has agreed to assign a dedicated special constable to 2 of our 8 neighborhoods to work alongside our neighborhood officers. We will also focus on engaging with youth by improving relationships with youth outreach and community crisis response at the City of Toronto. To improve the enhancement and expansion of the Neighbourhood Officer Program, we will continue to partner with Humber College to be subjected to an independent evaluation over a 2-year period. Evaluation methodology will include online and in-person community surveys, neighborhood officer focus groups, community focus groups, and TPS member focus groups. The evaluations will be periodic, the first being at 6 months. This will allow us to learn from the successes and make course corrections when improvements are necessary. We will also be seeking appropriate grants for professional evaluation from qualified and experienced police consulting firms. Our Enhanced Neighbourhood Officer Program aligns nicely its neighborhoods with defined City of Toronto neighborhoods, allowing for more consistent access to services. For the purposes of this exercise, the 8 City of Toronto neighborhoods we have selected with our friends at BIA include Lambton Baby Point, Weston Pelham Park, Islington City Centre West, Etobicoke West Mall, Oak Ridge, Kennedy Park, Lamoureux, and Malvern. Neighborhoods selected for the Enhanced Neighbourhood Officer Program will align with the City of Toronto identified neighborhoods, and a great deal of thought went into developing a methodology to help select these neighborhoods. The neighborhoods selected were based on statistical analysis of demographic and psychographic data, including population, family status, education, and fear of violence, and TPS data as well, which included crime severity index, EDP calls for service attended, and motor vehicle collisions. Input from TPS intelligence services and from our divisional crime management teams was also included in the selection process. The demographic and psychographic data was derived from the City of Toronto, Statistics Canada, the Census, the National Household Survey, and independent national surveys. This data was then aligned with the Territorial Optimization Boundary Realignment Project, normalized by residential population and weighted. Business intelligence then identified and ranked neighborhoods using this data for the expansion of the Neighborhood Officer Program. Neighborhood officers now have a tailored role profile that has been developed and is supported by the findings of our academic evaluation. Key activities supporting this profile will include a willingness to commit to a 4-year term, a focus on building relationships and problem solving, working with community assets and overcoming all sorts of barriers for the community, leading community meetings and bridging gaps between the community and the police. They will be proactive. They will focus on crime prevention. And prior to the new role profile, neighborhood officers often assumed duties that were general, not well defined, and reactive to the community rather than proactively building relationships. With regards to training, neighborhood officers will each be taking a 2-week training course of specialized training which will be delivered by both internal and external subject matter experts. This training has already commenced, and it was designed and received by neighborhood officers prior to deployment. Neighborhood officers will also return for periodic training. A training session has already been scheduled at 90 days after the pilot commences. The training has been designed to support the newly developed role profile and includes feedback from the community, our members, and academic findings. Officers will receive specialized training in mental health, bias avoidance, de-escalation and problem solving, gang prevention, dispute resolution, effective presentation, lawful authorities, SEPTED, and other equally important topics. What's next for our neighborhood officers? Well, the enhanced pilot begins October 1st. We will have a midway checkpoint in January to assess what is working well and any course corrections that need to be made. In May of next year, the program will be evaluated. Support for further expansion will be assessed using evidence-based findings and academic evaluation. And Chair, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank all the people that work at CPEU for spearheading this enhancement, and I look forward to continuing to build safe communities and neighborhoods together with our community members and community partners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from members of the board?
Well, Peter, we have 2 deputations, so we'll take those first. So if you guys can just stand aside for a second, we'll take the 2 deputations, and then we'll sit down, and I know my colleagues will have questions, and I've got a few. But thank you for excellent presentations. The first deputation is from Derek Moran. Derek, you know the rules, 5 minutes.
I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied. In doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. Let the record show that I'm supposed to speak on item number 6, also coming up after this. So this is from Bindi versus BC Projectionists, 1986, Court of Appeal, British Columbia. The Charter is part of the Constitution Act, 1982. It establishes for Canadians protection of certain basic rights and freedoms, which are part of the hallmarks of a free and democratic society. Historically, this protection has been afforded by the court in its effort to protect the citizen. Law applies to everyone equally, so that would also go for men, women, people, from abuse of power from government authority, and I would just add, and or corrupt librarians. So in this report, it says the primary objectives of the NOP at the time of its inception were to reduce crime, increase public safety, and improve public trust in the police. Well, oh boy, do I have the best ideas for Chief Saunders on how to improve public trust in the police. 1, teaches officers that as the Trespass to Property Act lacks the enacting clause required of it by Section 6 of the Legislation Act, that the Trespass to Property Act is actually invalid and of no force or effect to begin with. 2, that as it's a statute, the Trespass to Property Act actually applies to maritime law, which is the law that applies when one's on the water, as alluded to in Tropwood AG versus Savacca Wire and Nail, 1979 of the Supreme Court of Canada, as I've read out onto the public record here before at this board. 3, as I explained here last month, the Chief Justice of the Ontario Court of Appeal, George Strathy, in his in personam Admiralty paper, pointed out that Canadian maritime law is not the law of any province in Canada, for the Trespass to Property Act applies to a person. 5, person is defined as a corporation in the Legislation Act of Ontario. 6, tell all of his officers to not ignore the legal definitions of these terms of art being used in these statutes. 7, point out to his officers, specifically at 53 Division, that I am not a corporation. 8, point out to all of his officers the definition for conversion in Black's Law Dictionary, which partly says the act of changing from one form to another, the process of being exchanged. Because one thing I, Chief Saunders, and everyone in this room have in common is that no one's grade school teacher ever taught them to spell their name in all capital letters. No one's grade school teacher taught them either to spell their father's family name in all capital letters. Well, unless you work for the government. And as an example, this is Chief Head Librarian Vickery Bowles of the Toronto, as I refer to it, Private Library Board. Her last name is spelt in all capital letters. I guess that's the way you spell a government employee's name. And 9, once a Toronto police officer has heard for themselves that a library service manager such as Sarah Bradley freely admit, as she did in front of 53 Division officers Boyle and Reed, that yes, Derek was banned from the Northern District Library for ultimately mentioning a librarian's name on Twitter.
Derek, you've got 1 minute, and if you could please get back on specifically about the community officers.
And we're talking about improving public trust, right? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Could you please, you've got...
Do you know what happened to me since I've lost here, Chair Pringle?
I don't, but please, you've got 1 minute and 22 seconds here, so please wrap up.
A minute and one?
A minute and 17 seconds, so please wrap up.
Okay, so if I was ultimately, not me, the man, but the person, I've recently, since I was last here, was handcuffed, kidnapped, put in the back of a police cruiser, and held in confinement for 4 hours at 53 Division for ultimately mentioning a librarian's name on Twitter. I'd like to think in the future, when I bring it to the attention of these police officers that want to improve public trust, that they have the discretion, once they hear something that preposterous, that they would say, oh, hold on a second. This is an abuse of power, like I just read in this case, and we're not going to have anything to do with this. And if anything, Northern District Library, if we got to come back here again, it's you, Sarah Bradley, and you, Alan Barry, that we're going to haul off to jail for trying to pull a stunt as brazen and overt as this. Because I've come here before a couple months ago and read the Department of Justice's own website, what covers freedom of expression, hate speech, pornography, as bizarre as it sounds, child pornography, and defamatory libel. The idea that I was arrested, the person I have, for mentioning a librarian's name on Twitter is absolutely not acceptable, but I'm sure Mayor Tory will make it all right.
Thank you, Derek. The second deputation...
Any questions? Maybe Mayor Tory wants me to spend 5 minutes clarifying what happened with me?
Colleagues? No, thank you, Derek.
Leadership that works, Mayor
Derek,
Tory.
thank you. The next, Chris Langenfeld. Chris, you know the rules too.
I do.
Thank you.
There was just one quick point here on the Neighbourhood Officers Program. For the most part, I do, you've heard me mention before, agree with the idea of having officers assigned to a neighbourhood for a longer period of time and getting to know the people working there. But in the budget here for this program, there's a fairly large number, $250,000 I think it was, for bicycles. And I just want to make sure that these officers aren't ultimately going to end up being another bicycle squad that you see rolling by quickly and not really interacting with the people any more than we see with the cars. The whole point was supposed to be, here it is, $375,000 for 5 years for more bicycles. So I'm just questioning, is that going to end up that these officers are simply going to be, we've certainly seen it downtown here where there's groups of officers riding by on bikes, but they're certainly not interacting with the community or doing any kind of community policing, which is what we claim that this program is supposed to be providing improvement for. That's it.
Thanks, Chris. Colleagues, Mayor Tory?
Well, I just would, put back to you, again, I recognize the fact that when I go out with them, which I have done several times now across the city, they may not be behaving in exactly the same way they'd behave at other times, but I will tell you what's been interesting to me, and I just put this back to you because I think your question's a very valid one, I would agree with it, that when I have been out with them, it is amazing to me the degree to which those police officers, who I'm not sure if they're neighborhood officers or otherwise, some I think have been neighborhood officers, know all the people by name and they all know them by name, which would suggest to me that even when I'm not there, they must be having some interaction with these people because they know each other. Like, I've been amazed at the degree to which they go around the blocks of all the places where we've gone on bikes, and they literally speak to people by first name and they speak back to the officer by first name. And so I just would say that to you, not to be argumentative with you, but I have a little more faith just based on what I've seen, not the pace at which they ride when I'm there. They probably have to ride slowly to allow me to stay with them, but it's been more that I've seen this kind of, and I've been impressed by it because it is a lot of people who otherwise you might consider to be marginalized, who they know by name and who know them by name, and in neighborhoods, because I've been several times out on the bikes now. So.
Yes, and I've had the opportunity to see those photo shoots of you with a few extra officers to protect you and a few officers doing their jobs. And that's I certainly suspect that they've picked the plum situations where to send you out, sir. So,
colleagues, any other questions for Chris? Chris, thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Ewan, there you are, and Mario. Please come on back, and I'm sure my colleagues have a number of questions. Colleagues, questions? Ken, you had your hand up first. Jim, you were second.
In the presentation that you made, I didn't hear you mention between the city of Toronto and the province, they're close to, at last count, 100 youth outreach workers. That they have the potential of being effective in working in partnership with the police. But I didn't hear you mention any of that. Is there any kind of relationship with the youth outreach workers who are close to the young people in the communities?
Mr. Jeffers, certainly we're very aware of that. In our consultations, when we put this plan together, we looked at all the social services providers, and obviously the time did not allow us to do that. And some of the divisions that we do in the pilot also has a focus table there. So we're very firmly entrenched with the youth workers and all the neighborhood officers, and have been identified and have been it's a asset list for us that they are indeed our partners.
So you do work with them?
Of course we do.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to confirm that. And in the training, my other point here quickly is that you mentioned bias, what do you call it, bias avoidance. What is that? I'm not sure what that is. Could you clarify that?
In the neighbourhoods that the NOs operate, they're identified by the TPS as high needs neighbourhoods, and a lot of the neighbourhoods have a lot of recent immigrants, young people, high unemployment, and one of the things we found with the police, with the NOs, is that you need and they ask for specialised training in how to understand the community, how to communicate across different ethnic groups and different backgrounds. And one of the key things from an academic point of view is to recognize your own bias. And one of the dangers is saying, oh, I'm not biased, when actually you are either consciously or subconsciously biased. In order to bring in this bias training is for the officers to recognize that they can be biased, how to recognize their own bias, and how to deal with it. That was one of our recommendations. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How they're going to do the training, that was not part of our mandate.
Jim Cart, you had some questions?
Yes, just a question on your study. I was impressed by the overwhelming acceptance that people have with the program, and part of your study said that I think 80-odd% of people feel that there's crime reduction in the neighborhoods.
Yes.
Did you loop that back with the reality?
Yes.
So that's the perception. How does perception match reality?
This is the really interesting thing. We got a lot of help from the business analysis unit here, and they were able to provide us a breakdown of calls for service and reported crime to the police over the entire period for these specific areas. And then what we did was compare those areas to the divisions as a total and see the changes in crime. And the interesting thing is that the crimes against the person, assaults, sexual assaults, all, and some of the robberies all went up during the time period. Crimes against property, car theft, break and enters, all dropped. Now, from a criminological perspective, the most reported crime is car theft because of insurance. And in all these areas, car thefts dropped, even in comparison to the other divisions. So it's actually safer to park your car in these NO areas. Crimes against a person are based on trust. Do you trust the police? Because if you don't trust the police, you're not going to report it. Simple as that. And the increase in crimes against the person reflect back on the increasing trust in the police. And this also came through talking to the NOs themselves and saying, okay, what's happening here? And they're saying, well, one of the things that's happening is that people are reporting to us incidents that happened a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because now they trust us. If you've had a break and enter and a car theft, you're going to report it because you need the insurance coverage. And it doesn't matter about your trust in the police, but the personal assaults, and it was interesting when we got the data and we thought, hang on, what is this? And we sat down as academics and said, okay, let's flesh this through, is that if you trust people more, you're going to report more. And so the irony is that as this program continues, we should see an increase in personal crime, the reporting to the police increase, and the calls for service should slowly decrease. And again, that's in the next year, we're going to be sitting hiring more analysts and crunching more numbers. So we'll get back to you.
Thanks, Jim. Upla?
Thank you. That was really great to hear you talk about that and explain that. I think what's great about this program is that it's been evaluated, and then, so you said that it will be, you're going to do it again in May 2019, so it would be really great for you to come back to the board at that time as well.
Yes, it's we've been again given the opportunity and got the funding from SHIRK to now evaluate this enhanced program,
Okay.
which it'll be interesting to, and then we can compare right back to the beginning of the study for these enhanced areas, and then compare other areas as well to see if there's any changes happening.
Excellent. Just a comment I wanted to make, and then I have a question. I really appreciated seeing that some of the skill sets that you are imparting on these neighborhood officers through the training is around mental health and addictions and crisis intervention. I think that's really excellent. My thought is this is a big change. It's a big program. You're moving into lots of new areas with new staff, new officers. How are you addressing kind of the change management aspect of this change?
Well, first of all, at the onset, we've been working with Mr. Rankin from the board since the inception, since the genesis of this project, and all our officers. That's why we want to start off smaller in 8 selected neighborhoods. Right now, we have 33 neighborhoods. We want to do it one step at a time, one neighborhood at a time, and we want to all the officers working in these 8 neighborhoods. They have received the training, and they have been personally being. We met as a group, whether it's myself or Mr. Rankins, and they've been communicated. And this is a continuous step. And there'll be, like Staff Tommaso said, there'll be a 90-day check-in where I'm going to meet with all the 8 neighborhoods under one roof. And we're going to talk about what's working, what's not, what needs to be fixed, and then we're going to move forward. So communication strategy is extremely important, and thanks to strategy management, Sandra, we are pushing out communication. As a matter of fact, today we just sent out a command message to all unit commanders, to all members of the Toronto Police Service, civilians and sworn, that this program has been launched on Monday. So that type of reinforcement of communication is an ongoing process.
Ms. Muller?
Thank you. Thank you for the workup and the presentation. I think that we're understating today how exciting a day this is. This feels so
I'm happy you were
low-key, but I have to tell you, we've been waiting a long time for this focus, so I really am very excited. I do know that the devil is in the details. I'm glad that we have a partner in Humber College sort of to help us along. And my main area of interest is on the training and the way that the training can be made innovative. So I'm going to mention something in a minute, but I want to note that the community members that have been involved, and perhaps you can tell me whether the neighborhoods you originally surveyed are the same neighborhoods you're going into, the people you originally involved really are an asset to you now, because they get to see the beginning of the work that they contributed to, and they get to see how it's going to grow and be adjusted. So I would make sure that you don't forget that those you consulted originally have gotten you where you are going today.
Yeah, Ms. Muller, you're absolutely correct. Staff Tommaso said before we put the program together, I went and met with all the communities in those 8 neighborhoods. It is my intention almost at the conclusion of this 6 months pilot in these 8 neighborhoods, I'll be going back again and inviting people to come. And I would extend an invitation to the board if you want to come and see the feedback or hear the feedback, so you get it firsthand. You'll be more than welcome to come, because and I always told each one of those, at every one of those meetings, I'll be back to speak with them with this enhancement. It's good. It's not good enough to ask our officers or the academic partners. I want to go to the constituents, the end users, and see how they feel about the program that we're delivering in those 8 neighborhoods. So that's our intention.
Great, and it would be great to hear that part of your training model included active participation by community members, so we can get to that in due course. So what I will leave you with is an observation from the CBC show. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was White Coat Black Arts, where Alan Alda was interviewed, and he's coming to town in November. And Alan Alda runs a foundation that is about empathy. Now, Alan Alda, you may remember, is the doctor from MASH, and he has taken it upon himself to talk to the world about how the interaction between a doctor and a patient can be transformed by the concept of empathy. I think you mentioned empathy in your presentation. He's coming to Toronto sometime in November. Please make sure at least 3 of your officers go and hear him. And I think you'll learn a lot, and we'll be able to apply that in this training.
Thank you. Maybe I should hire you as a consultant, Ms. Muller, because the 90-day check-in point, the community members from all the 8 identified neighborhoods, when I spend a day with our neighborhood officers, they'll be coming. They'll be sharing the experiences face-to-face with our neighborhood officers during that 90-day check-in. And once again, if the board wants to take advantage of participating the whole day or part of the day, you're more than welcome to come and share the experience.
Peter, you've got our input for free. Don't offer to pay for it. Any other questions, comments? Colleagues, if not, I have a couple. First of all, thank you for a great presentation, and Staff Superintendent Tommaso, I think it's a great job, so thank you. As you correctly identified, this is a program which already existed, but was one of the key focuses of the Transformational Task Force. In fact, that's why, Peter, we established the job that you now hold as the chief, deputy chief, so that we could divide the primary response from the community, because the community was always getting pulled away. But going forward, I presume that as required, if there's a priority response and the community officer is available, the neighborhood officer is available, will they be involved as well, so they can bring a greater insight into, say, a situation that's an urgent situation? How will the two interact?
The interaction is fluid. The neighborhood officer, obviously, we want them to spend as much time in the neighborhoods as possible. But that's not, we're not lost the fact that we have to respond to emergency radio calls. If they're needed somewhere else to, saving lives, they'll be redeployed. But having said that, I'm foreseeing many of the neighborhood officers in their neighborhoods will be responding to some of the radio calls in those areas. So the primary response would not be going to those neighborhoods to answer to radio calls, because I want our neighborhood officers to respond to those radio calls so they get to know the community, understand the pulse, and understand the gravity of the situation. So where they can, like you heard from Staff D. Tommaso, they have the flexibility to develop programs working alongside with the community to tackle those issues at root cause, instead of waiting several days later for someone else to come in, so they get to see firsthand what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, and chatting with our neighbors and our community members. So this report we put forward, Chair, is at the request of Mayor Tory. Right now we have 33 neighborhoods. The report is requesting that we seek additional fundings to staff 60 neighborhoods moving forward for the fall of 2019. We can do 33 neighborhoods right now with our existing resources, but we all understand Toronto has 140 neighborhoods, and I can assure this board, any time I engage the public, every neighborhood, every community, they want neighborhood officers there. So it's something that the public is asking, and I believe it meets all the requirement on the way forward report, community-centric policing. So this report with all the financial figures is a 5-year budget to staff it up to a 60 neighborhoods. Obviously, the work is not done. We're going to seek additional opportunities to continue to move forward to maybe 80, 90, and eventually we'll have every neighborhoods in this city to have embedded neighborhood officers there for them for 4 years and longer.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy. Ken, I think you had one more question before we turn to general discussion.
Just one quick question. It's really good that the relationship with the community, as you've stated, has been quite positive. How is this reconciled with the recent discussions that we've had around the SROs and schools and that sort of thing? How does that reconcile?
That's a different discussion. We are working right now with TDSB on a different delivering model for our schools. Schools is our young people is extremely important, and the schools are extremely important partnerships. Neighborhood officers, obviously, they will have schools. They will be part of their patrol, part of their community. But at the same time, we're working simultaneously with the TDSB right now to have a new protocol, a new mutual agreement, how we're going to deliver services in the schools. And I hope I will bring this to the board in the next 2 meetings, because we're working very rigorously with TDSB because the school year has started and we don't want to drop anything. So we are working along with their leadership team at TDSB.
Colleagues, comments? Mayor Tory?
Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I had the privilege of being at one of the town hall meetings that Deputy Chief Ewan had and saw his presentation about this program, and certainly and heard the feedback to it, which was all positive. I'm going to move a motion in just a moment that has to do with the funding, which I think Carleen has. But I think if you look at what our ultimate responsibility is here is to maintain and improve safety and to modernize. I think if you go back to the Modernization and Transformation Task Force, it was to modernize with a much greater community focus and to work on sort of through that kind of means as much as anything else to crime prevention and reduction, and very importantly to build trust. I think that was something that we all recognized was something that had to be addressed. And I think from what I've heard from the Humber study and read and the town hall presentation, which was a bit different in terms of talking about a lot more granular facts in the individual neighborhood that we were in that day, and then some of the police information we've heard referred to today, this thing works. it works. And it's unlike many other things where, you know, you end up sort of taking a flyer on it in a certain way. This one is, I don't think it's taking any flyer whatsoever to move forward with it in the way that you're suggesting. And I think that the only constraint probably has been, as you considered how to roll it out, first of all, logistical and practical things such as training all the people and so on, but also money, obviously. And so my motion seeks to do the obvious, which is to ask, to have the board ask that the police service works with the mayor, meaning me for now anyway, and the chief, to seek funding from the other governments, because I think what we've been doing with them, obviously, is trying to find ways in which we can get them to help us fund crime prevention, crime reduction initiatives. And I think we've had some success with that, but I think this falls right within the sweet spot of what they're both trying to do as well. And so I think that in order to allow us to move forward with the expansion, which I'm prepared to commit that we would do in any event, because I think it makes so much sense that if the city, you know, had to do this, we would do it. But I think it is one of those things where we would be, we would not be, you know, doing our duty if we didn't go and ask the other governments to help us with this rollout, which I think they will do. And my motion includes something that's really just, you know, dealing with the kind of process here, which is to have myself as mayor and the chief report back to the budget committee in November as to sort of what success we've had in convincing them to contribute to the cost, which I think gets into the $16–17 million a year range as we roll this out, and to come back here to the board in December of this year to report on our success. And then it also just incorporates into the same motion while we're at it, asking the chief if he'd report back to the board as soon after the mid-checkpoint in January 2019 as reasonable on how it's going, because obviously, you know, I don't mean how it's going in terms of the fundraising part of it, but how it's going in terms of the actual rollout of the program itself. But I just think this is absolutely consistent with what the three governments are all trying to do, and this is one area where I can say we are all working very well together, and that I believe that this is something that they will assist us to make sure that we have the funding to expand this program as per your wishes for 2019. The 2018 part is done, as you said, with existing resources, the new neighborhoods that you've announced today. But I think the 2019 part is very, very important. So that is the purpose of my motion. I speak to my colleagues in saying that, but also with thanks to the deputy chief in particular and all the other people who've been involved, including the Humber group, because I think it's allowed us to, we knew in our hearts this was the right way to go, but this provides us with the kind of backup information you need to give people the confidence to invest in it like the other governments, and for us to proceed forward with it. So thank you.
Comments, other questions, colleagues? If not, the mayor has put a motion, three-part motion before the board. May I have a seconder? Councillor Hart. All in favor? Any contrary? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, Mayor Tory. Again, Deputy, thank you very much, and Staff Superintendent Tommaso and Dr. Thompson, thank you all very much for the work done. It's hugely appreciated. That, as I said, moves on to the next item, which was held, which is 9. And there is a deputation on number 9, and that is Derek Moran. Derek, 5 minutes. I'll give you a 1-minute warning. Thank you.
This is our great new Premier, Doug Ford. Just want to make a quote by him since last time I was here to speak. Every politician at every level in every region needs to remember is that we all share the same boss. We all work for the people. Like, I don't want to keep coming here and getting into it with you regarding this, Chair Pringle. You took an oath to uphold the Constitution. Section 2B guarantees our freedom of expression. I wouldn't deliberately come here and sign up on an item and speak about what type of fishing lures you like to use when you go fishing, okay? I like to pick out certain points, dwell on the case law, the legal definitions. If you guys don't find it interesting, like, I don't know, go tweet something on Twitter about a librarian at Northern District Library, I don't know. Anyways, okay, so in this report it says, the The officers continued to struggle with Mr. Doucette, but subsequently gained control of him and completed the arrest. During the arrest, Mr. Doucette was yelling to alert other people in his residence that the police were coming, because remember, only the government and pharmaceutical companies can sell drugs. Thank God for the police to prevent Paul Doucette from cutting into their business. Now, I just have to wonder, why is he being referred to as Mr. Paul Doucette? And so I'm going to bring this up the first chance, goodest time as ever. At the end of an executive committee about a year ago, Mayor Tory, at the end of it, walked into the hallway and saw me being, I guess, interviewed by Marcus Gee of the Globe and Mail. Mayor Tory stopped, and I said, you know, Mayor Tory, Marcus is asking me, like, what's the big thing about me being referred to as Mr. by Mayor Tory? And Mayor Tory was like, yeah, Marcus, I have no idea what he's going on about that for. And what I explained to Marcus Gee was, and he got this part, do you remember the old Henry Fonda movie, Mr. Roberts? Mr. Roberts, it's a naval movie, right? Of course. Mr. Roberts was actually, I think he was a high-ranking officer on that ship. However, his superior officer was the Ernest Borgnine character. So when the Ernest Borgnine character, the superior officer, would tell Henry Fonda, Mr. Roberts' character, to do something, he would be referred to as Mr. Roberts. That's why I always say, respectfully to Mayor Tory at Executive Committee, just to correct the record, as I understand it, Mr. is a term of Admiralty Maritime jurisdiction that refers to an inferior subordinate. If I have ever led the City of Toronto believe in any way that it's inferior subordinate, then please forgive me. Okay, so there's that. Now, I just want to point out, since we're dealing with arrest, and you just found out what happened to me last time I was there. This is from the Dictionary of Canadian Law, just in case, I'm assuming Paul Doucette is going to watch this somewhere at some point. There's a definition for false arrest. That is the detention of a person without lawful authority and without the consent of the person arrested. Now, you're probably wondering to yourself, wait a second, if you're arrested, why would you still need to give your consent if you've been arrested? So, this is from Black's Law Dictionary, 9th edition, the third definition given for arrest. Maritime law, the taking of a ship and sometimes its cargo into custody by virtue of a court's warrant. This one is from the Dictionary of Canadian Law for arrest, the fourth definition, an admiralty action brought against a ship. Now, why this is all relevant is because at the end of an executive committee, Mayor Tory was acting like a bit of a fanboy with this guy. And so once I noticed he was leaving, I waited out into the hallway for him to come out, and I said, excuse me, sir, I just want to know where I can get a copy of that paper you once wrote called Entering the Magical World of the Natural Person. And this lawyer named George Rustdye was nice enough to give me his business card and said, you know what, I'm going to look for it. I think I threw it out. You know, I said to Mayor Tory that I'd like to give some of my papers for the new old City Hall library or something they were talking about. But he wrote back to me, hello, Derek. Thank you for your interest in the Natural Persons paper. I'm afraid that it was one of the papers that I recently discarded. Sorry, and with best wishes, George. So, okay, so one time I'd like to hear Chief Saunders say on the public record, is it when they arrest someone, is it people, the man, woman being arrested, or is it the person being arrested?
Thank you, Derek.
See, that one didn't go so bad.
No. Colleagues, any questions for Derek? Derek, thank you. Colleagues, any discussion on this particular item? If not, may I have a motion to receive? Councillor Hart, Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 11 is also held for a deputation, and that is for, there's several. Sorry, this is item number 11. The first is Brenda Ross.
I wonder if we could do one of the others first.
Okay, sure, we can do that, Brenda. Chris.
Okay, hello again. So going back to when this was brought up in July, Chair Pringle, you mentioned the point that this is this ShotSpotter technology is in 90 cities. You did a good job quoting their advertising. And of course, you'll notice that of those over 90 cities, only one of them isn't in the United States. That's Cape Town, South Africa. Something that, according to the article on ShotSpotter's website promoting them, it's rated among the world's most violent cities, according to ShotSpotter. Other than that, so of course all the others are in America, and so there's a bit of an issue there how that relates to the world's worst city for crime versus Canada and Toronto, where of course you regularly like to talk about the fact that we have one of the lower crime rates in North America. The issue here really is, of course, the privacy concerns related to this technology. And you'll notice if you take a look, you can, for example, take a look at ShotSpotter's actual website. And when they talk about their technology, they talk about the fact that within 25 meters and runs features of the sound through machine clarification. Our Incident Review Center, IRC human experts confirm the machine classification and publish an alert. Talking about the detection process, the sensors then send these features to our cloud service as part of our data packet that includes the location coordination of the reporting sensor and the precise time and arrival and angle of the sound. The issue here is that, in fact, all these sounds are recorded. They're broadcast to the offices of ShotSpotter in the United States, in California, and then they choose and evaluate that information and then decide if they want to send that information back to the local police department. Considering we're talking about a country that has declared Canada to be a national security risk for its country, it seems rather disturbing that you want to spend $4 million of taxpayer money to put in listening devices so that a foreign country can listen to the people on our streets. And of course, you like to bring up the fact, oh no, this is only about recording shots, and it's not about recording people. But of course, in fact, when you take a look at what the reality of the situation is, you can go back to, there's a 2012 article from South Coast News, January 11, 2012, New Bedford, Massachusetts, an audio recording of a street argument that helped police arrest a suspect in the murder. New York Times article from May 2012 talks about the system has raised questions about privacy and the reach of police service. You look at thedailymail.com, their headline is, now that's a listening post. Big Brother fears as New York Police Department attaches microphones to lampposts to listen out for gunshots, but they also record our conversations. That March 2015 article in the body of that talks about audio recordings from ShotSpotter have been used to corroborate testimony that led to convictions in a Massachusetts murder, a voice shouting, "No, Jason, no," before shots were fired. Really? Okay. So the concern here is that, in fact, these devices and the ShotSpotter technology is recording voices. It is sending that information to a foreign country, a country that has declared Canada as a threat to its national security in certain areas, and you want to spend money to put this technology in. The fact is, you're talking about having a referendum on whether or not we like what the province has done and what another level of government has done to this city, and yet where's the referendum to find out whether or not the people want video cameras and microphones installed in their neighborhoods? And I can tell you that a lot of people that I'm talking to don't want it. And of course, Wendy Gillis had an article from Toronto Star here back July 23rd, 2018, talking about the fact that the CCLA, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, has brought up concerns about listening devices being installed by police. And I'm actually surprised to see that the CCLA isn't here today making a deputation on this. But there is certainly a lot of concern about this technology, and so I certainly hope that the board will not go ahead with this at this point. It's also a problem having this meeting having actually come originally from a private meeting of police at City Hall, but of course this body, which is not just City Hall appointees, but is in fact almost half of them provincial appointees, the reason being that we don't want just the city making decisions about these things, and certainly not done in secret meetings at City Hall, talking to the police about what kind of listening and surveillance technology they're going to be putting in on the people. And you can bet that if I'm mayor, this program will be being eliminated, not continued.
Next, sorry.
Hi, I'm also talking about the shot spotter. And a few minutes ago, Mr. Torrey, you talked about sometimes you take a flyer on something and see if it works. That's exactly what's happening with shot spotter. And that's a very cavalier attitude for spending hundreds of millions of dollars on, hundreds of thousands of dollars on something. And you're talking about how you're concerned about spending, how we don't have enough people on the drugs and guns task forces. But so you sort of say, well, we really care about public safety and money's got to be spent right, but there's too much smoke and mirrors. There's too much emphasis on optics rather than evidence. There's too much emphasis about giving as much money to the police as they want, even when many other sectors of the city, as we all know, are being cut to the bone and beyond. And I want to bring your attention to this article from October 2016, where it said, where the mayor, it says, mayor calls for firings in wake of scathing medication fraud report. And in it, the mayor says, quote, termination is an appropriate kind of penalty for that sort of thing, because we cannot, in a circumstance where we're trustees of the public's money, allow it to be abused. Yet, in the information on ShotSpotter that's before you, where's any information about where this technology is providing a good return on investment, or whether it's an abuse, in fact, is an abuse of public money, misuse of public money? There's none. Where's the evidence showing ShotSpotter increases arrests for gun crimes, decreases shots fired calls or alerts, and reduces the number of people being shot? There's none. Where's any meaningful information at all? Like even how is the money being spent on ShotSpotter? Where is it being deployed? And when? There's none. And there's just the claim that some arrests are made as a result of ShotSpotter. At the July Police Board meeting, you can ask Mark Saunders to corroborate that there would be an immediate reduction in gun violence, with the implementation of the plan to spend $4 million on ShotSpotter and get CCTVs and some more community programs. And Saunders responded, quote, I don't want to get into this vortex. He continued, our role when it comes to enforcement, the enforcement piece is robust. Please understand the entire script and not frame it into that same direction that has been repetitive. I don't know what he's saying. It just sounds like some sort of, he's prevaricating some script from the ShotSpotter sales department. So there's no research that's being presented here. So I did a little bit. It doesn't take time. I encourage you all to do the same. And here, for example, is an article from Forbes in November 2016. And the author writes, quote, the question now is whether the technology is worth the millions of dollars it's costing taxpayers each year, and if the lack of tangible results is because we don't have the ability to measure them, the results that is, or that they simply don't exist. Here's another report from the Cincinnati Enquirer in August 2017. It quotes Dr. Jean Doliek from the University of Virginia, quote, until researchers have a chance to truly analyze the effectiveness of the technology and public officials are pressured to make sure it's a good use of money, all the stories about deterrence, technology, and community relations are just that, stories. So, Mr. Tory, you're on record as saying that people who waste even just a few $1,000s of public money should be fired. The lack of evidence of ShotSpotter's efficacy indicates it's probably a waste of hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you stand by your statement, Mr. Tory, you should be fired. There's another example, and this is kowtowing to the police, to the private sector. Just like a couple months ago, you tried to get $519 million in tax credits, property tax credits to your cronies in the development industry. So this does not help increase confidence in the police or in yourself. It erodes it, and that's not helpful. And you know, though, that you can rely on people on the board to back you up, and the chief to do the same. And you can count on credulous members of the public. They're fooled by your and the chief's facility with making untruths sound credible. Many people believe you when you say you're all working to help reduce gun violence by being tough on crime. And we just need to give the police force more money, to give them whatever they want. Unfortunately, there isn't any objective evidence that's the right approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any questions of Ms. Fry? Thank you very much, Alderman. Brenda, are you now? Thank you.
I also will be making a statement on ShotSpotter and going on to the cameras when it's my turn. So ShotSpotter actually is a technology, an unproven technology. Reports in the media suggest sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And what it actually does is take away the public's involvement in their own problems, relying on an unproven technology and the hopes it's going to catch criminals. I don't believe it's going to catch anyone unless we have some criminals that are going to be shooting off their guns and standing around waiting for the police to come and get them. Otherwise, I don't believe they're going to catch anyone. There's not one report I've read that said anybody got caught because of ShotSpotter. And I can't even imagine that no matter how fast the police are, they're going to get there so fast, the criminals are just going to be waiting for them to show up. It doesn't prevent anything. What it does do, though, is show defects in the system of enjoying our public participating in their citizenship. So instead of good citizens who are going to call the police and assist with criminals, we're going to rely on a totally unproven technology. And we're going to pay for it. We're going to give millions of taxpayers' dollars for this unproven machine that's going to maybe alarm us about some shots being fired. It's absolutely ludicrous. I've never heard anything so ridiculous. This company must be led by a chief executive officer that's a genius. He's somehow perpetrated amongst I don't know how many states and how many people that they should buy this technology. The man's a genius. But as far as helping us with gangs and violence, I don't believe it's going to do anything except use our money. I also believe that because people will think they're being taken care of by ShotSpotter, they're not going to do their duty. They're not going to call the police. They're not going to be vigilant. They're going to sit back while they hope some machine takes care of their troubles. A machine with a name. They don't have to participate in the protection of the people in their own community. They don't have to assist the police. We've got this machine, and on that'll be playing in their head. Also, ShotSpotter, no one's ever mentioned this. ShotSpotter alarms after shots have been fired. Well, hey, it's too late then. If I've been killed by someone, I'm laying on the ground, I don't really give a damn whether the police come along or not. I'm already dead. So I don't know what you're all thinking of. I wonder if the criminals have all taken to laughing at all of you and the public in general, hoping that you spend your money on ShotSpotter. Hey, then no one's going to bother to call the police. We can just shoot up whoever we please. This is just, I've never heard such a thing. The idea that the police are going to get here, arrive at a crime faster after shots are fired misses the point. The point being preventing gangs and gun violence. That's the point. So I have to say, I wouldn't give ShotSpotter Company 1 penny of our money, not a half a cent. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Is this thing working? Good. Brenda, thank you. Any questions, colleagues? Brenda, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deputy McLean, there have been a number of accusations, and Tony, you've been involved in this as well. I don't know if you want to correct some of these things, but please, before I ask my colleagues for questions, it might make sense for you guys to respond.
So, board members and Mr. Chair, what's before you today is an interim report, a status report on a tool that we are considering in terms of reducing gun violence. It's used in other jurisdictions, good or bad, and we want to now see if it's a good tool for the Toronto environment. Before we do that, there's a number of due diligence, and the report talks to some of the discussions that we've already had with the Privacy Commissioner, the Canadian Civil Liberties Union, and we're going to be talking to the Ministry of the Attorney General. In terms of due diligence that we have to take to protect privacy concerns, oversight, ensure that there's community engagement before any investment is made, look at operational, financial, and making sure that this actually is a benefit to Toronto. We haven't spent 1 cent on the ShotSpotter technology. It's a solution that we are looking at. It's a solution that we will talk to the board about before a decision is made in terms of moving forward. But we want to make sure that we do our due diligence and actually deal with some of the issues that have actually been brought up by the deputants, from privacy, from community engagement, and from operational or value for money perspective.
I'll just add one small thing because Tony covered over very well. Interim report, and this is a proposed implementation staged with 3 spaces of consultation with the experts as suggested by our deputants. You know, the development of criteria where these ShotSpotter technology should go if we decide that's the right route. And then finally, with communities, this would be a collaborative effort so that we can see how community members feel. It's not us imposing on it. The communities are a very important stakeholder in this. And this is also a journey that we would take with the board because there are probably some board policies that would be required. So this is an interim approach, and this report is for information and the opportunity for us to have some dialogue on it.
Colleagues, questions? Marie, Upala?
I was not able to attend the presentation that was prepared for board members to have a deeper understanding of it, so I apologize if this was discussed then. But because we had the benefit of the neighborhood officer presentation, and because you just mentioned, Deputy McLean, the role of community in consultation, I'm wondering if there's a relationship between those 2 models that could take place. We have communities that are looking for input. We've identified them as high, I'm not sure what the exact terminology is, but priority communities, priority neighborhoods, and certainly that's where one would expect gunshots to happen more often than not. So I asked the question, is there some thinking, or could there be some thinking into how to use those original 8 communities in part of the continued analysis around whether or not this is technology that is worth the money, that whether it can be done, if it is worth the money to protect privacy, and assuming it does have results. Thank you.
I'll just respond in the sense that we're looking for a made-in-Toronto solution, and our neighborhood officers are a key element of our relationships with our neighborhoods, and you're seeing just how well it is working. So there absolutely is opportunity for our neighborhood officers to be part of the consultation. This is one piece. This is, one piece of our response to this. The neighborhood officers are another piece. So I don't want it to be seen as, this is the answer to everything. It's not. It's those relationships with our police officers in our communities that most need it are also an important part of our response to this, as are the intervention programs, the working with the focus tables, as are when we actually arrest and bring people to justice, that they are actually held accountable for this. So it's a multi-pronged approach, and I just want to remind the board that this is one piece of it.
Ms. Adkisar?
Thank you. As Marie mentioned, I did attend the presentation that was prepared for board, as did Councillor Hart, and I really appreciated that. Answered a lot of my questions. So considering how much information was shared then, I'm really surprised to see such a lean report prepared for the public today. And I totally understand that this is an interim report. So in terms of the, thank you. In terms of the final report, here's some questions that I would like to see addressed in the final report. So the first is really a detailed description of how the technology works, whether the microphones are always live and recording, and if not, how do they capture the relevant audio clip? Who owns the data that's collected and who has access to that data? In terms of the efficacy of the technology. So this is the first time this is being tested in Canada, legally speaking. So what are the implications of that? And how effective will it be in prosecution? Because this is the first time we're bringing it to this country. The other obvious question that other people have raised around how does this comply with our existing privacy legislation, and the one, of course, on top of my mind is, if this is on top of a building, what's the implication if it's a healthcare-related building? Of course, it has to comply with HIPAA legislation. So, what are the implications for that? And then another question that was brought up by one of the deputants, but I've been thinking about too, is what's the implication of having this data stored with an organization that's not in Canada? What's the implication of having our data stored in the U.S. From all those perspectives? And the last thing I want to add is I think our motion back in July or whenever it was not just for ShotSpotter, but for CCTV. So if you could expand on that in your final report too, that would be great. Thank you. And I think your plan for doing all these extensive consultations is great. So I'm glad to see IPC and CCLA are being consulted.
Thank you. And some of those questions that you have, we have those questions, and that is why one of the partners that we will be consulting is with MAG, in the sense of, there's no point in having this information if it can't be used for prosecution later on. So those questions, as well as the CCTV, we will bring back in our next report.
Ken, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm also sorry I wasn't here for the presentation. I was away. However, I'm going to do my due diligence and for sure around this. But one quick question here is that would you view this as a prevention tool, or how would you classify that?
That's a good question. Potentially could it be both, in the sense that if the locations are known, people won't be using their firearms there because they can be detected immediately. It is more of, I'd say, a more effective response tool, because when the sounds of gunshots are detected, then the police service is notified almost immediately. And so we can respond more quickly with this. And I think it says right in this report that some of the police services that have had an experience with this, they thought they were getting all of their shootings reported, but when they implemented the ShotSpotter technology, they were in fact finding incidents where calls to the police service were not happening. And that could be for a number of reasons. They could think, oh, somebody else had called, or they could be wondering, was that a gunshot or not? But what we found, what they found is that they were able to identify more incidents where shootings happened where people did not phone the police. So reactive, proactive, it could be both.
Yeah, because I remember asking the chief about response time and that sort of thing, and I thought he said something like 5 to 7 seconds or minutes, sorry, to respond to shooting or what have you, right? So that's why I asked whether it was a prevention tool, because if it's a 5 to 7 minute response, in the scheme of things, is that considered a response that's a lengthy response, or I'm trying to get a sense of that.
The response, what the ShotSpotter technology allows us to do is to understand almost immediately where a shooting has happened within our city, and then it's up to us to respond to that. So whether it's 5 or 6 minutes, what we are now would have the opportunity to know is when something happened, and then we would know it immediately. Right now, we don't know if we have incidents of shootings that are not being reported. We do know that we have incidents where a shooting has happened, where somebody comes out the next morning for work and they may find either a window with a bullet hole in it or their vehicle, or they may see casings. So we are not getting reported to us in real time shootings that are happening in this city. Would this technology help us out? The possibility is there, but there's a lot more questions and consultations to be had before we get there.
Colleagues, any other questions or discussion? If not, there is a motion. So to provide a further report to the board at its January 2019 meeting that explains how the various oversight and implementation issues raised in the preliminary report and raised through the consultation with information of the Privacy Commissioner and the Canadian Civil Liberties Association will be addressed. And 2, collaborate with board staff to develop in the development of this report to ensure that the board is able to identify what, if any, additional governance and direction may be required. Comments, questions, colleagues? If not, may I have a proposer for the motion, Ms. Neda-Kucera, a seconder, Councillor Hart, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And it brings us to the final item, I think, which is item number 14, which is the Toronto City Council, this immediate steps to address. Yeah, was it not on? Yes, that's right. So this is the correspondence to me, the council's immediate steps to address gun violence. There are some deputations as well on that. So the first of those is, well, I'm sorry, I guess we need to, for item number 11 to close it off, we need to not only pass the motion, but to receive the report. So a motion to receive the report, Councillor Hart, seconded, Ms. Neda-Kucera, all in favor and contrary. Okay, so that now then brings us to 12, which is the City Council of Gun Violence. There are 4 deputations. Brenda, do you want to go first, or do you want to?
But we're always going to have gun violence. But the problem is it's gotten out of hand. Toronto has been brought to its knees. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? The board, the city council, the mayor, even the prime minister has helped to bring Toronto down on its knees. Literally, there's not a minute that I don't hear on the radio, read in the paper, some announcement about somebody got shot or stabbed. And so we've got shootings and stabbings all over the city. So I am going to say this. Let's think outside the box at what I'm about to say, because I doubt very much anyone else is going to say it. So I will. I think that the city, when they resume after the election, should consider rescinding our designation as a sanctuary city. People believe that sanctuary city means lawless city, a city where anything goes and you can do whatever you want. And the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the pudding. Now, according to some of the media reports about what's happening in our city, we've got people in our city that were ordered deported by the United States of America, and hundreds of them have come this direction, and they are not being deported. We don't know why Americans said they should be deported, so they are all question marks. We don't know what they're up to here. We have a large number of illegal immigrants. We don't know what they're up to either. We've got people flooding into our city that are question marks. And now we've got, I think they've brought some of their problems with them. They don't have to attend classes in how to be a good Torontonian, so they're doing whatever they want. And according to the agenda, we've even got people saying a certain segment of society are busy shooting each other. So while all of this is going on, As you know, the motto for the City of Toronto is strength in diversity, diversity is strength, or whatever it is. I've got a better one. United we stand, divided we will fall, count on it. So basically everyone's got to be good Torontonians. What are we going to do? All of the stories about the neighborhood police, this is all police-based. This is people in authority telling other people what they better do, and other people who are frightened of the police don't want to listen. So, number one, I'm going to suggest that when Mayor Tory and his council return, if he's still the mayor, or whoever is the mayor and the council, consider immediately rescinding Sanctuary City. I also suggest that a letter goes to our Prime Minister who says that because of our international commitments, we're required to take in illegal immigrants. And this nonsense about being called an irregular migrant, I have no idea what an irregular migrant is. There's immigration to our city, and there's illegal immigrants crossing the border with no checks. The police are not supposed to interfere with them. And we actually had a deputant here who told all of you that he resented a policeman asking him whether he was this or where he came from, whatever it was. Well, isn't that too bad? The police apparently are not allowed to do their duty. So the criminals now have the upper hand. So the two ideas are no Sanctuary City, right to the Prime Minister, we don't want any more illegals, and last but not least, something unusual. A gentleman on the radio recently gave a 2-hour description of what he and his group do. They're based in the United States of America. I took it upon myself to call him and ask him if he and his group would be willing to help us. He said, I have permission to give the chairman of the board his number, his phone number in America, and what they do is they move into correctional facilities, they move into rehab facilities, they move into neighborhoods, and they try and do behavior modification, a preventative tool. And I'm suggesting that one of you, whoever you want to choose, ask him if he could help. Can his group help? They also train people in how to use their behavior modification. I think it would be helpful if you all tried to think outside the box and do things differently, not the same story about cameras and this and that. So I would like you to consider my ideas, and I'd like you to consider contacting Mr. Henderson. I'm going to give his number in a minute to Mr. Pringle, and he said he's quite willing to speak to one or more of you to explain what they do. Before everyone bursts into laughter, he has been successful in the places he has gone.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any questions for Brenda? Brenda, thank you very much.
Thank you. If you don't mind,
the
Mr.
next-
Pringle, can I pass
Yes,
Mr. Henderson's phone number?
please give it to Carlene.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
The next deputy is Christopher Elegon.
Oh, will you? Thank you so much. That's kind of you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for helping me. Thank you. Carlene, please. Mr. Henderson. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you so much.
Board members. I'd like to make the suggestion.
So just so you know, you've got 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Okay. I'd like to make the suggestion that there is a connection between the change in gun violence and the conversion of cannabis and other drug-related paraphernalia to legal, what you call it, products. The problem is that for organized crime, that is a cash cow, and you're converting it away from them. It means that they intend to muscle in on people who can't handle them after the fact. It means that what you're looking at is manufacture consent to take guns away from ordinary people so that they have a stronger play in the distribution and the allocation of market share. they don't want to make the same mistake that they made when prohibition was converted. As you well know, people like Lansky and Charlie, what the fellow from New York again? I forget the names now. I mean, these aren't yesterday's people, but they regretted that they didn't control the conversion. They're correcting that mistake this time. I would suggest that we set up a series of spotters, which is to say that we divide the city into a geographic area that dissects the city, and in every dissected area you have at least 3 spotters. These spotters are to be trained in recording the actions in this area. They're not to interact with the public or pretend that they're police. They're simply to be able to give us a quick and clear description of events that take place in a geographic region. If we do not address this as an attempt at manufacture consent, we simply fail to understand what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Elegon. Are there any questions for Mr. Elegon? If not, thank you very much.
Oh, by the way, that name is Eligon.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Elegon. Thank you. Derek.
This is...
Derek, you know the rules. We're going to give you 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. This is George Rustide's business card. I forgot to bring it up last item. Since Marilyn Toft signed this letter for head city clerk Yuli Watkis, it'd be great if Marilyn could get Yuli Watkis to give me my $5 back that she still owes me. I mentioned that at an executive committee a while back too. So I told you last month, Chair Bringle, I'd bring this month. This is from Villard Construction versus Bird Construction, 2016, Court of Appeal of Alberta, that simply says, the duty, remember Mayor Tory, I mentioned last month that everyone at the City of Toronto takes their duty to the people very seriously. The duty of loyalty that you all owe to us, the people, is the theoretical basis for the duty to protect the trust assets, to account, and to provide information. So there you go. Okay, so unlike you, Chair Pringle, Mayor Tory is actually on Twitter. This is John Tory he's got a couple Twitter accounts. Toronto's mayor on September 20th, he says, I keep posing the question, why does anyone in the City of Toronto need a handgun? And nobody seems to have a good answer to that. I fully support the federal government's decision to begin asking Canadians that same question as well. Well, first of all, respectfully, Mayor Tory doesn't even know where the law is, which is a maritime statute, that applies to a person probably defined as Her Majesty in an organization that says people can't have a gun to protect themselves with. Second, I actually just answered Mayor Tory's question on why anyone would need a handgun. For the same reason Brenda Ross needs a handgun to protect her family with, because it sure as hell doesn't seem like anyone else is gonna. What about the seniors, Mayor Tory, being terrorized in Toronto community housing? Nobody seems to be able to protect, as read from that article Rosemary Frey, I guess she left, read out aloud here 2 months ago. Whether it's a lazy Northern District librarian or a lazy TCHC special constable, we wouldn't want to make them angry by expecting them to do their jobs. Why does anyone need a handgun? I've got 2 words, Bernard Getz. Anyone notice how Mayor Tory's not asking Chief Saunders and the Toronto Police that question on why they need a handgun? Anyone notice how Mayor Tory's not asking that question of Commissioner Vince Hawks and the OPP on why they need a handgun? Anyone notice Mayor Tory's not asking that question of new Commissioner Brenda Lucky, I think it's you pronounce it, and the RCMP on why they need a handgun? Remember, our public servants have decided that only our public servants can have a gun to protect themselves. And I have some more, what I think are some very good responses to Mayor Tory's question that he may be familiar with. And this is section 9 of his signed code of conduct, which he pledged, which is surprisingly disappeared from off the internet. I will introduce real penalties for elected officials and public servants who abuse the privileges, responsibilities, and trusts that accompany public service. We work for Torontonians, not the other way around. Making City Hall more functional means making sure council is accountable and working for you every single day. Toronto's elected officials work and answer to you, the citizens and the people and the men and women, not the other way around. What I'm getting at is that, by his own words, we're not here to answer meritorious questions. He and everybody else who's a public servant of ours is here to answer ours, which, as we've found out over the past few months, this board especially has a great aversion to, and at the Toronto Private Library Board too. So what I'm really trying to say is that Meritori is simply not qualified to ask the rest of us that question. Everyone who doesn't work for the government's answer when they hear Meritori ask that question should respectfully be none of your business, Meritori. We don't care about what our glorified maids and butlers at the federal level think of your question either. As an example, the federal MP from my area, Marco Mendocino, can't even give me a straight answer from the Ministry of Finance on which financial institution uses financial institution number 900, as seen on the bottom of a remittance from the City of Toronto. He thinks it's a technical question. Well, I guess because the Royal Bank of Canada uses financial institution number 003, Marco would also consider that to be a technical question if I asked him that too. And I know, Chair Pringle, you're a big supporter of small business in Toronto. I just want to point out that Toronto Tees on Yonge Street, in between East Side, in between Wellesley and College, printed up this T-shirt for me this morning. Northern District had me kidnapped for mentioning a librarian's name on Twitter.
Derek, thank you. Any questions for Derek, colleagues? Derek, thank you.
Is the print big enough? Should I get big enough?
I'm old. It's a long way away.
You're not that old. You should get glasses, though.
I do. Chris? Five minutes, Chris.
So,
1 minute warning.
Okay, thank you. On the extra 100 officers, I refer back to, there was a September 13th article, CBC News, 200 more officers, one less shooting. Toronto Police gun violence strategy ends with uncertain results. And so the idea that we're going to, now granted that was done in 200 officers doing their overtime work rather than extra officers, but we haven't seen anything other than sort of the assumption that, well, if we put more police out on the streets, it'll solve something. Doesn't seem to be any proof that it actually solved anything this summer when we spent all that money to have 200 officers working a whole lot of overtime, other than we know those officers were complaining about being mighty burnt out from it. But it doesn't seem to have had any giant reduction in crime rates. That's similar to the call for banning of handguns in Toronto. And if you really believe that it's so dangerous to have gun sales happening in Toronto, I believe there's only 2 gun stores in Toronto that sell handguns. So why haven't you, as a board and as the mayor, turned around and told the police to station an officer out front there and investigate the people going in and buying guns? You would think that would solve the problem pretty quickly, rather than saying, oh, well, the federal government and the province need to take care of this because apparently the city isn't capable of doing anything. We need somebody that can do more than just say, well, I hope other levels of government will fix these problems. And I'd like to suggest that maybe the board look at creating some policies like that for, if we're concerned about guns being sold in the city of Toronto. I rather tend to doubt that there's many of the gangbangers going out there with their FAC licenses to buy bullets in these stores. But if you think, and if the chief believes that that's an actual risk happening, then let's deploy a couple officers and have them stand out front of those stores and investigate who's buying these guns. Seems pretty logical, and you would think it would resolve the problem, rather than trying to say, oh, well, we should ban guns from people living in northern Alberta and they shouldn't be allowed to have handguns. I don't know if they have them, but I don't think it's going to make much difference to our crime rate here whether or not they do. And the same goes with whether or not the ability exists for target shooters and things like that to be able to buy guns in Toronto and go to licensed target shooting ranges and do some shooting. Yes, there are risks with guns, but there's also people that need them, whether we say we agree that our police officers need them, whether we think that the armed guards out there working for Brinks or whoever need them, whether we think private security guards need them, whether we're going to decide that City Hall needs to have armed officers rather than having metal detectors searching anybody in the public going into the building. These are all questions, and rather than turning around and saying, well, the federal government better change our laws in this country and start putting more requirements on everybody across this whole country, you know, we have people that are saying, oh, we should secede from Ontario and become our own jurisdiction here in the country. And you take a look at the rest of the country and what they think of Toronto, and they think we're pretty arrogant because we think that whatever applies for us should automatically apply for the rest of the country. And the same goes here with handguns. The idea that Toronto is going to dictate because we're apparently incapable of properly managing the situation and dealing with the problems, that we're going to call on the federal government to solve the problem for us. We can do a lot better. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions, colleagues, for Chris? Mr. Langfeld, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Deputy McLean, any comments you want to make based on the deputations you've heard?
Yeah, we're just looking for Ian Williams because Ian gave us a presentation this morning on some of the effects of the summer safety program and the effects of it in general. I can say what we normally see, the pattern of shooting that we see is, you know, on the weekends, late at night, and what we found was a shifting of that in fact there were less shootings during the weekends, and what we saw as a normal pattern. So while that was not reported in the article that is currently within, you know, the public domain, Ian's data analysis and analytics actually showed a different story.
Colleagues, other questions, comments that people, Ken?
Yeah, you know, I feel very strongly about, let me just back up a little bit. I got a call from a young man in Malvern last week who I do some work with Malvern kids in Lawrence Heights, etc., etc. And he does a lot of work with young people, and I do some sessions with them. And he called me and he was crying. And he's a worker in the community, and he said a young man who was killed was one of the people of the group that I was involved in. 3 weeks ago, some people called me to go down into a neighborhood out in the West End, and I spoke to a father who lost 2 sons to gun violence, black youth. And, you know, it keeps on and on, right? And I'm going to be very direct about this. I've been involved in many, many recommendations about violence, gun violence, way from the United States to here, etc., etc. And it really pains me to understand that within the last 10 years, there have been, and I counted 125 recommendations, very good recommendations from the city, etc., to deal with gun violence, particularly in the black community, which our people don't often mention. Because 75% of the perpetrators of violence in the community are black men, young men, and victims, 75%, well, a high percentage, and it has been like that for years. It's never been considered a crisis, right? And when you don't consider something a crisis, you don't take critical measures. And I can say for sure that having worked with 3 police chiefs around violence in the community, that, you know, there isn't a group or groups in particularly the black community that can partner with the police in trying to prevent violence because they are not resourced. That's a fact, all right? I've mentioned to the mayor a few times, I managed grants in the city for a number of years. There isn't one group that is in the recreation department is receiving infrastructure funding. Community groups, that is, never have been. And so what I'm saying is that there's an absence of expertise. Nobody questions or evaluates the training effectiveness of these groups that don't have resources. And it continues to go on and on. I was involved in the 4-level government report. We did a report with Justice David Cole on the increasing incarceration of young black women in Vanier Institute, young black men who are now probably fathers of some of these young people. Nobody took it on, right? Justice Cole was very upset because he asked me to go with him across the province, etc. So there are many examples of that. And right now, the young people are saying nobody can help them. And they're right. Right now, this is the perception, and this is their reality. They've said this to me many times, and I get lots of calls, all hours of the morning sometimes, and that's not an exaggeration, because they don't have the resources out there. Okay? So I'm saying all of this in that the police are shouldn't be expected to take care of all of these problems. It has to be in partnership with expertise, you know, and to say, well, you know, Chief Saunders, you know, or whomever, and the senior officer should be doing this and doing that. It's a very, very, very difficult situation to deal with. And you need partners, you need expertise, you need training, because you're doing the same kinds of training. I was amazed when I asked the question about youth outreach workers. I was one of the people who started that program, right? And I know for a fact that some of these youth outreach workers are supervised by people who never went into public housing, right? When I was on the board of public housing, we started programs like that, right? And it's not sustained. So then why should people have confidence that this time is going to be different? Okay? On tomorrow, some mothers said to me they want me to come with other people to talk about their fear in the community. I took the chief a couple of weeks ago to that as well. And so what I'm saying is this, right? That we have to look at different approaches. There are people who are receiving some funding who are not skilled in dealing with all of this, but nobody seems to evaluate that, all right? A young man told me in Chester Lee, he said, Ken, you're going to have to buy a gun from me. Meaning this young man, he's 17 years old. And I said, why? He said, because we have to come and take what you have. Some of them said, two of them said, I asked them, where are you going to be 15 years from now? You know what they said? Dead. Young people, 17 years old, 16 and 17. So my point is this, that you know, I think we need different approaches, and I'm not just talking that. Some of us are sitting down to do that right now as we speak. I don't have staff to help me do it and all of that, but we're going to do it because I think the suggestion about bringing people from the States, we brought people from the States here 8 years ago. They couldn't do a thing. They were paid a lot of money. But it's a different environment, and this may sound strange, but it's a you know, there's certain nuances and stuff. It's different, right? In a lot of ways. And so now we're going again until it quiets down, and then what? So some of these folks who I'm working with want to come and make a presentation at some point and say, this is what we are prepared to do, and they're going to put it to the board, right? But I'm too old to be going over the same things over again, right? And I just want to put that out there and say that different game.
Okay, you have been talking about this for some time.
I'm sorry, what?
You have been talking about this for some time,
yeah.
correctly?
Yeah.
This is the type of initiative that the mayor has addressed at the city with the investment in the communities. So the result of what we talk about is the policing is in effect represents the failure of the investment that we're not making. And your point is we've been talking about that for years. Hopefully, Mayor Tory, under your leadership, and we're talking about it, and you're talking about the investment, we will be making those investments. But if you've got a group that you want to bring to this, let us know and do so.
Yes.
Colleagues, any other questions for Ken? If not, there is one more item. Sorry, I guess on that, no. Thank you, Brenda. We've had your input and we appreciate it. Please don't disrupt the meeting. We need a motion to receive those deputations and receive that report. Councillor Hart, seconded. Ms. Mulliner. All in favor? Any contrary? Okay, there is one other item, and it's the walk-on item 13, which is the indemnification release for property located at 288 Brenner Boulevard. This is the Ripley's Aquarium for an event next year. I will take, recognizing that this is just a walk-on item, I will take deputations if there are any walk-ons, but colleagues, you have that in front of you. If there are no deputations, may I have a motion to approve item 13? Colleagues, Mayor Tory, seconded, Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? Then may I, if there's, ask if there is any other business to come before the board? If not, a motion to adjourn then. Yep, sorry. What are we doing here? Who does? Barb, have you got, understand, I'm told that you have an update on the motion, the city motions?
Very quickly, because a lot of the...
So let's reopen this. That would be item number 12. We'll reopen it to receive the update from the service. So I need two board members to reopen that. Ms. Molnar, Ms. Santacasera, all in favor? Carried. Okay.
So very quickly, Mr. Chair, at the last council meeting of the year, council approved a number of motions related to reducing gun violence in the city. And basically, the chair and the board have now asked us to provide a verbal update on some of those items. There was 8 items that were before council, or the council put forward. 3 of them actually apply to the service. The rest actually apply to the city manager and other city officials. So the first one deals with the shot spotter, which we've discussed already. City Council expressed concerns around privacy and making sure that those concerns had actually been addressed before we made any investment in the shot spotter technology, and I think you've heard today that we are doing our due diligence in that regard. The next motion that they put forward was for the board to immediately hire 100 new police officers that would be paid through the Tax Stabilization Reserve in 2018, and with the 2019 cost to be considered as part of the 2019 budget process. We actually are planning to hire 175 recruits in the December class. 100 of those will be the actual numbers that the city asked us to consider. Number 3 was basically around the deployment or hiring and accelerating the hire of police officers, experienced and quality police officers from other police services. And basically what we've done is we've already hired through HR and Barb's leadership 10 officers from other police services we hired earlier this year, and we're hiring another 4 who are actually going to be starting on Monday, and we plan to hire additional officers through that source in 2019. And when you look at 3B and 3C, which is to accelerate the implementation of the sustainable neighborhood policing model, and C, which is really around policing community partnerships that currently exist in 11, 12, and 13 Division. The Enhanced Community Neighborhood Program that Deputy Ewing talked to today will actually address both those issues. And so they will be addressed as part of the enhancement of that program. And that is it.
Questions, colleagues? Comments? Okay, then may I ask for a renewed vote to receive the deputations and the report? Mayor Tory, Ms. Molnar, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. That then brings us, as I say, to item number 13. And I take it we did? We passed on it? Okay. Oh, yes, we did. Then motion to adjourn if there's no other business. Motion to adjourn. Hart, Mayor, Councillor Hart, and seconded by Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? Thank you, everybody.